Hello world, welcome back to the Pocket Gamer podcast with your hosts, me, Brian Baglow, and our data diva, Miss Peggy and Salz. Wonderful to see you as always. How are you today?
I'm good, and that's a good way to describe it because it's all about data. I wonder sometimes, Brian, what do you do? Because we do this together for over a year. Do you come to the show and then think of the title? Because you're doing it differently every single time. So I'm impressed.
I look at the guest, I kind of look at all the prep that we do, and I just try and come up with something a little relevant, but that just captures the joy that I feel whenever we're together and we're doing one of these shows.
And data diva, that describes myself. I think it also describes our guest as well. So let's get to it because we do have a data geek just like ourselves today, Brian. So we are, I think, in the data geek equivalent of, yeah, seventh heaven or, just really, really excited. She has worked with startups to big names. So she's seen it all from Ubisoft to Meta. She's been at the forefront of understanding how data can change the game. I mean that literally and figuratively. And I was at her presentation. I was blown away because it was a totally different way of looking at the data. So I'm really building this up. This is going to be exciting and unique, Brian. I'm not
Hmm.
overpromising. So we
You
have
never do, Peggy.
I never do. Indeed. So we have Safia Dawood. She is senior data scientist at Moloco. As I said, very lucky to have her on the show, and she's going to share some of the latest insights on how data can drive growth, which is what we all want for gaming marketers. Safia, great to have you.
Thanks, Peggy. Hi, Brian. I'm excited to be here.
And
Yeah.
we're really going to enjoy you being here because, as Peggy says, yeah, it's a bit of a passion. It's the we hear so many times on the show from so many different people. One of the key challenges that the games industry is facing is not just having all this data, but understanding it and using it to tell stories. What's the key phrase? We love an actionable outcome on this show, Safia. So delighted you're here. Peggy, do you want to kick off?
First of all, I have to say, I think we're on a roll because I looked in social. I always look in social, and people loved it when we had Google on the show recently. So I think we're just going to do like a little bit of a data sweep. But this data is special because it's not just the data that matters, it's the ability to see it in the context and that perspective. And so one of the things I looked at when I was looking at what you've done to data and how your colleagues also describe you, Safia, they call you out as someone who can deliver powerful insights, which is what we need, but in record time while always maintaining an unbiased perspective. And that I found intriguing because I remember when I was studying statistics and that famous book, Statistics Lie, or How to Lie with Statistics. So it is possible to do things with numbers that shouldn't really do, but you're maintaining an unbiased perspective. So I'm intrigued. How do you stay objective when analyzing such vast amounts of data?
In my opinion, as a data scientist, I think insights are only as useful as the people who you're telling it to and whether they trust it or not. And so, which is why I always make sure that the work that I'm delivering is peer reviewed and that everything has been kind of documented so that people can reproduce it and can poke holes through it, because that's the only way that people can trust things, is if they can fully understand how this is coming to light. I think there's this misconception that data is always going to tell the truth, but as data scientists, we manipulate data a lot of the times, and it is our responsibility to make sure that this manipulation is in the most unbiased and objective manner.
And not an easy one if you think about how many people are trying to push the narrative or their specific narrative. We are in challenging times, but you have found growth here. But it isn't easy. It really is not easy.
No, I think it's really important to acknowledge that bias around you, and I think a lot of we very often fall victim to either the bias that we have within ourselves, but also or the bias that's in our data. Even the way that data is collected is not always completely objective and unbiased, and so it's good to keep that in mind when we're starting to lay out hypotheses that we want to test, or even at the end when you're starting to write up your insights or turn it into actionable decision making. It's good to keep in mind the limitations that there were around your data and around yourself.
So, Sophia, I'm really interested about your approach because it's all about seeing what the data is really telling you. And you've identified three key phases here: growth, stabilisation, and now a slowdown. Um, I'm sure that feels a bit unnerving to marketers who are seeing, you know, fewer installs or dropping revenues. Can you talk us through the phases in a little more detail?
Yes, so I presented this. I think it was in May, and I the data basically zoomed out on the trends to look at since 2022 what's been happening, and so we had a big period of growth around 2022, followed by stabilization for most of 2023, and then around the end of 2023 and beginning of 2024 we really started seeing a slowdown. And I reviewed that data before coming on the show here, and it seems like 2024 has been a year of declining downloads. A little bit less so for revenue, which is still promising, which shows that also the market is maturing and we're finding newer strategies to um, to target. And so at Moloco, we're seeing less and less the type of one size fits all acquisition strategies and more tailored strategies. And so we also see that most games that were before IAP monetized only are now hybrid monetized, and we're seeing more and more kind of this converging of IAP and ads monetization coming in most games, which I think is a way for the market for the gaming companies to pivot regarding this market that we're seeing as well.
That makes perfect sense. And in fact, we've in one of our previous podcasts, we've just been talking to an ad monetization expert who was saying exactly the same thing. There's no one size fits all anymore. It's all about the specifics. The game, the genre, the audience, the region. So that's completely fascinating. And um, what should gaming companies kind of take away from that in terms of these phases, and how should they be looking at or thinking about adjusting their strategies as we move into this slowdown, as you call it?
Yeah, so the when I did that, when I looked at the trends, I also double clicked into the revenue trend to look at what was driving this revenue trend. As you already know, that revenue can be broken down into so many different KPIs. I regrouped it into three different KPIs, which was repeat purchases, transaction volume, and conversion, so number of payers. And what was really interesting was that we saw that the trend was mirrored in the repeat purchases, and that we also saw the same thing in the top 1% paying users that seemed to be driving the same kind of growth, stabilization, and a beginning of slowdown around the end of 2023, beginning 2024, and it keeps going now. And so I think it's really important now to start understanding the different type of user profiles that you have in the game. Not that gaming companies haven't already been doing that, but I think there's a renewed kind of importance around this. Understanding their users, how do you retain them, keep them engaged long enough for repeat purchases, for a second conversion, for a third, and so on.
I'm curious there, Safia, because I'm thinking they do have personas, they have been targeting, they have been segmenting, but is there a requirement to refocus, so to add some richness to these profiles and segments, or is it just doubling down and working on what you have? So it's not just the fact that you need to think about the audiences, but maybe be a little bit more nuanced or sophisticated in how you do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're already seeing some of this in gaming companies, but I think looking a little bit deeper into well, from my perspective, because we're an acquisition platform, I think looking into kind of a more holistic strategy from acquisition, the onboarding process, the tutorial, the monetization, how does it all link together? And so having different markets that are being now monetized differently between IAP and ads monetized. Thinking also about whether, so you have so many new, we've lost some signals, but with the evolution of the device market and the games market, we're getting different signals that we also need to start knowing how to use in our acquisition strategy, but also reflecting that the strategies that we're using in our campaigns deeper into onboarding and the gameplay and monetization.
the show is really about putting data, putting knowledge in the hands of our audience. And you do tell us the good news is that, yes, we do have signal loss, but we do have signals. Absolutely. So, can you share anything about how marketers should be leveraging data for more targeted campaigns? Maybe there's a signal they're not thinking about. And it's like, good news, you just need to open up the aperture of how you view the data, and you'll be home free.
So there are two things that make me a little bit hesitant about this question. One is, I think, in terms of marketers, I think the gaming industry is among the most creative and innovative out there, and they have a lot of data into their game that from the acquisition or ad tech industry we don't have the same luxury of getting. So they probably have data that I've left the gaming industry 10 years ago, came back now, and so there's probably new data now that I'm not privy to. But I do think that now we're starting to see this differentiation in different markets, and so different markets have different type of user profiles, and so therefore I think we should be looking into how do we leverage that kind of user profile. So we lost more kind of performance signals, but I think we can gain more now into looking into other types of signals that are more inferred rather than deterministic.
This is it. It's when we started to see a lot of the lockdowns in terms of data protection in various regions around the world. There was a lot of fear that we would be losing all of our data, losing access to all of the things that we considered vital at that point. But there's so much more, and that ability to infer data, I think, is something that must be a new skill. We've had to learn it in the recent past. Are you seeing a different approach since you came back to games, Safia?
Yes, I would say definitely different approach, different ways of, and I think a lot of games are already integrating that type of behavior where you look at different campaigns and the way instead of looking globally at your retention, we're now looking at different campaigns and how do these different cohorts play differently, behave differently, and monetize differently in the game. And so I think we can add more quality to that type of data and do more more refined player segments with regards to the market that they came from, the device that they have, and these type of data.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's dip into some of the real world data here. So, despite the broader slowdown, we have a reasonably small group of incredibly well performing games that are still seeing growth. Can you tell us? Do you know what they're doing differently, or what they might be doing better than the rest?
One of the things that really stood out when I presented this finding of these top performing games that had consistent revenue growth despite the slowdown in the trend was the fact that these games had better retention even past D7, which usually D7 is quite um, a key performance indicator in acquisition campaigns, and they had that across both iOS and Android. So this was across all device, across all the top performing games. And on top of that, they also had higher repeat purchase rate. And while from an advertising platform perspective, I cannot personally say that the latter was driven by the higher retention. I think it would seem like they have a more holistic strategy for engaging and monetizing their users.
The focus on repeat purchase is interesting because it means that you're also thinking longer term. Is that another point that you're seeing, not just more holistic, but thinking again further ahead and being maybe even as I was talking with one marketer, she was telling me, we're being more patient, we're giving things a little bit more time to figure out if they work or not. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
To be honest, not really within acquisition campaigns, but I think they definitely should. I think there's more to do when a player is engaged enough that they're not leaving the game, they're staying. And repeat purchases is one thing, but if you think about repeat purchase, it means that there was the first purchase within the first day or so of install. And that takes me to another important point, which is retention. So I think you can have having an overall better retention for your game makes all the other metrics follow, right? So if you have better retention in your first 3 days, you have a better conversion in those first 3 days. Um, then your repeat, you have a higher like a bigger volume of users that you can then take to a repeat purchase, right? And so I just think, so in my mind, when we look at a D1 retention that's around 30%, that's effectively 70% of your acquisition budget that is being, to say it quite brutally, wasted, right? So 70, you have 30% D1 retention, 70% of your acquisition budget is wasted. And so taking a hard look at your campaigns, thinking about like really going into that retention, and then once you are there, starting to look at monetizing these cohorts better. So I think it's more of a it's less long term. It's more kind of really diving deep into the data and looking into how can you have those little incremental gains that will just improve all of these KPIs.
That's another thing I'm hearing more and more. It really is the incremental gains. In fact, we had someone, Brian, on our show who said that that was really what differentiated, leaders from laggards was you're aiming on incremental gains, small ones, not these big ones. We come from an industry where I think we just got into the whole idea of thinking big, and didn't adapt that thinking so much.
I know this industry loves breakthroughs, right? Something new is coming, and it's so exciting, and it's driven by passion, and it's driven by new ideas. And this proposition is quite boring, but it works. When you have a game that is already existing, you're not gonna. If you have to do a breakthrough, then it's effectively a new game. So we're thinking about here, we're talking about how do we improve games that are already on the market, that are already established. And so looking into like these incremental gains will get you further, I think, for existing games and then you can reproduce those learnings for new games.
It's a great point. It's a great point, and coming from a development background, the exciting part is always the next project or the sequel, because you can do all the things that you didn't do in the first one and all of the great ideas, but just tweaking and improving every element. Your user acquisition campaign, the creatives in your marketing, your in-app purchases, the ad revenue can make an enormous difference to pretty much every game. But I'm gonna come back. If you have a developer, you have a studio, a publisher out there who aren't getting that sort of early retention, who aren't getting that engagement, that revenue that they're looking at, how do they turn it around? What should they be thinking of?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but I'm gonna go back to retention. I think taking a hard look at your campaigns and making sure that you're targeting the right audience, that your creative asset is reflective of at least the early gameplay, your initial gameplay, I think would be my first instinct. So going from your acquisition, making sure that your acquisition is reflecting your game, then going into your game and looking at um, even before D1 retention, your onboarding and your tutorial, like really being nitpicky about your drop off rates at each point, and making sure that you're getting the smoothest curve that you can. And then from here you can start looking into, okay, what's the offer that will be more tailored to kind of your user at each point, and having like these inserting seamlessly offers that are tailored to the user profile, I think is where the game is at.
It's also interesting. It mirrors what we've heard a lot, which was at one point it was just acquire because growth is good. Growth is great. And then a lot of marketers said, but we've got people in our game who really aren't for the game. It's not going to be attractive, so it's not going to work, and we're going to lose them. And then we had, a number of marketers said, you just have to know when to say no, actually. It looks too good. You're like, take them all. But later on, and what I'm hearing here is if you're not focused on retention from the start, you're ultimately going to be wasting resources. It's going to look good, but it's not going to be sustainable.
I think like if we start focusing on ROAS is where we start looking into um, uh, like having a lot of installs is great, but if you're having all of these installs drop off after the first day, what is that really bringing you? And so therefore, are we playing a game of maximizing installs at the minimal cost, or are we playing the longer term game of making sure these users are staying or passionate about the game and don't mind spending a second time, a third time? And what are we doing past this D7? How are we keeping these users engaged for longer? Because if a user is passionate about your game, this is when they don't count the money that they're spending in your game because they love it.
This is incredibly interesting, really valuable information. I think a lot of our audience are going to be, having a long, hard think after listening to this episode. But let's switch gears for a second and dive into some of the really sort of key, chunky data points that you found. Peggy and I are going to hit you with a few quick numbers, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and get your take on why they matter. So brace yourself. The first one is the top performing games, right? Um, the top performing games had a 22% higher transaction volume compared to the benchmark. What does this tell us about player behavior, and how should a marketer act upon that?
I think 22% is an impressive number for a higher transaction volume. But then you pair this with a lower transaction value across these top performing games. I think this and a higher retention that we mentioned before, this seems to be painting a really convincing picture of better payer engagement, and therefore more opportunities to monetize the engaged players. I think this one is probably less for the marketer and more for the product manager, but it's to focus on less higher on focus less on higher price points and focus more on monetization opportunities across the longer term.
And maybe also a hybrid on top of that, because you're not letting anything go. So there's probably also a mix because it's just such a smart thing to do to think about all the opportunities. Again, incremental.
Yeah, I think we see also a lot of games that start out as being very casual and then move on into like a more mid-core or more engaged strategy later on. And I think that kind of behavior is just so interesting for because you start in the game because the gameplay looks good at the tutorial, but then you need a little bit of complexity to keep you engaged for longer, and that makes you pay, right? So I think that's really interesting.
Progression, the magic progression. So important. Important in everything. I'm a little bit hung up on repeat purchases because I have so many friends in the industry, what they'd love to see. Because when you see this, everything is going to go, well, maybe not smooth, but better than expected because you have them, you have the hook, they're back. And repeat purchases were 5% higher in the top games by day 7. So looking at that, that's not just a great number, but there's something marketers are doing in that first week. What should marketers who are not in those top performing games, obviously, what's the lesson here? What do they need to do or consider to drive more of those purchases?
So I don't want to state the obvious because it's in the name, but repeat purchases touch on two things, right? You have the purchase in the first day after install, and then a continued engagement for a second conversion opportunity. And so looking at the onboarding and having all games have those welcome offers, but I think really making sure that your welcome offer is not a shortcut for the game. It really helps players engage more with the game, and then having a reduced drop-off rate for across the funnel down to even D7 is where you can then have a higher volume of engaged players that will then give you more opportunities to monetize them.
So, really strategic, just being very strategic about how you acquire, but also the signals that you're picking up on, the behavior that you're picking up on to encourage this, to make this happen. This doesn't happen naturally. It's like, loyal users are made, not born.
That's a great point, Peggy. Yeah, and again, it reflects something we've heard throughout, which is you have to be thoughtful about this. You have to think about your player at every stage, and let's be honest, you have to test this.
Yeah, well, definitely.
Throwing it out and crossing your fingers and hoping for the best is not a sustainable business model.
And also being able to compare when you test is you're able to then compare what you did versus the side of the panel that didn't do anything to be able to really get that incrementality.
Exactly so. Exactly so. Beautiful. Okay, last one. I promise, Safia. Uh, the top games again are spending significantly more on remarketing campaigns, particularly on Android, which surprised me. But uh, why is remarketing such a critical part of growth?
Well, two things. Firstly, Android, because we all know remarketing is not such an easy feat on iOS, and so we could only focus on Android here. Secondly, so this is an aspect of the analysis that is both a feature and a bug, in the sense that to be able to get a comparable data set to look at the trend that spanned over 2 years meant that I had to look at games that were experiencing consistent so I wanted to look at games that had this data set for 2 years and wanted to differentiate games that had a consistent revenue growth. So which also meant that I had to exclude any games which launched in the past year because then otherwise I wouldn't get the trend. So as a result, it makes this data set a data set of established games, and with established games comes a growing pool of churned users. And so as a game matures, I think it's really wise to start looking at that pool of users because these were users that were early adopters, they were users that were engaged in your game, and especially looking at the users that were monetized before churning and thinking about how do we bring them back to the game. I know I constantly reinstall all games, and I most of the time the second time I reinstall is when I monetize. And so from my perspective, re-engagement campaigns really work.
It's a balance, right? Because as you said yourself, you have more opportunity to, you've got win back or just re-engagement in the remarketing. But you also have to be concerned or careful about how you do this, when you do this. Again, that personalized, non-intrusive offers at critical moments. You said yourself, not even just the offers, just the communications of having the tutorial at the right place, or having information that doesn't upset the gameplay. There's no answer to it, Safia, really not. But it would be interesting to hear from you how marketers should engage to retain.
A lot of the time we're focused on that like the earlier part of the retention curve, D1 to D7. What are our users doing there? But what about after the D7? What about the after the first purchase? What are users uh, if the first purchase is giving you a shortcut to the game, what is left for users to stay? How do they do their set? Is there even an opportunity for repeat purchase because you've already kind of skipped the gameplay to the easy part? So I think really keeping your users engaged in a game that's challenging enough, that's open enough, and that the offers will not just be a way to skip to the easy part, I think is really important. So keeping your users engaged and making sure that they have something to what's the phrase, to dig their teeth in, I think is the phrase, in the second, in the after the monetization, after the D7, looking further into even D30. We know that the curve flattens to a quite sad picture when you look at a retention curve and you go to the end of D30 and it's flat. There's nothing that will bring them back. But I've seen, in my experience when I was working in games, I've seen later monetization features that can provide a bump into the retention curve that makes users come back after. And so I think this is really an interesting thing, and it's not necessarily where games are focusing on right now. We're looking at a lot of casual games, a lot of hyper casual games that are, even though moving to IAP, I don't think we're are providing a lot of longer term user experience or gameplay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we had someone here a while back, Brian, from AMP showing us how, you know, things do follow a pattern, maybe because no one got around to thinking like you, Safia, and saying notifications, it's great if you think everyone wants to see it in the morning or at a certain point or a certain point in the game, but it's really about mixing that up and the incremental value of just a little bit of variety and recognizing that all players do not play the same. That was incredible. And it was such a small point, such a small fix. It's doable. Technology's there, maybe just the marketer mindset, not yet.
I think we also have to think about user behavior. First, I want to caveat everything I say with I'm a data scientist. It's easy for me to imagine things, but I don't know how easy it is to implement. But I think when you also think about the new freedom that users have now to not have any notification from games, or to not share any data and to be completely private in the way that they're playing. I think it's something that we need to keep in mind, because a lot of these behaviors are coming from higher end devices, and so these are very often the users that will also monetize. And so how do we keep up to date with that kind of behavior in the gameplay, I think is really important.
It's so interesting. I'm just going to go off on a tangent, Peggy. I'm really sorry, but one of the things that we've been talking about on the podcast quite a few times, Sophia, is the fact that more and more of the user experience is in the hands of the developer. You know, from monetization and business models through to how do you stay in touch with your player, and if you can bring your creative mind to that and look at some of the technical limitations, there are some very, very clever ways in which games are really pioneering the building that engagement with users without necessarily having, you know, the updates on the phone or getting you to sign up to a mailing list. So it, you know, for me, it makes the marketing a part of the design process.
Yes, I agree. I think, and we heard about that during that UA Society event that where I presented, is having this kind of seamless now collaboration between UA managers and gameplay and designers and producers is giving us so many. Is just adding new dimensions to what we can do as marketers now, right? So being able to have differentiated tutorials, differentiated onboarding experiences, depending on what market you're targeting, what type of users you're targeting within that market, and what gameplay experience you're giving those users. I think is adding so many dimensions that I don't think we as an acquisition platform are fully aware of, but I think it opens a world of opportunities for marketing.
That's interesting. I want to pick up on something you mentioned there, which is in terms of markets and regions. Are you seeing any differences between sort of the key regions, and is there anything that really stands out to you?
We saw that in the when I was comparing the top performing games versus the rest of the games, it was quite interesting to see that the top performing games were investing more in EMEA. They were investing more in Android. They were just investing differently compared to the benchmark. And I think we don't necessarily see like I said at first, there are no one size fits all anymore, but we do see that games that are successful are tailoring their strategy better. And so for having a bigger chunk of your budget on EMEA, I think correlates quite highly on the fact that they have probably tested and they have unlocked EMEA markets for higher ROAS that other games have. And I think this goes back to, again, like being able to tailor your campaigns for these challenging markets that might monetize or that might behave differently.
Well, that's exciting news then, because then we have that as a key focus area. I mean, I've always seen it as untapped. There's still a lot in EMEA, which is good news for developers because it can be very, very local and it's untapped. There's local everywhere, in fact, is what we're hearing. Again, localization, that is one of the key pillars of a strategy to grow in these times. And I want to bring us back into that because here we are, we're well into Q4. And it's your job, Safia, no pressure. It's your job to see around corners, to look on the horizon, to look at data trends, because that's always so exciting. Looking ahead, what are the emerging trends or opportunities that you think gaming companies should be paying attention to in, say, the next 12 to 18 months?
I think the gaming market is more mature now, and the emerging trends are less obvious and more complex. And with the iPhone and the high-end Android devices now supporting heavy gaming, I think we'll see more kind of cross-device gaming. We are already seeing a lot of cloud gaming, and with that comes a lot of challenges around tracking, around building more accurate user profiles as they jump from one device to another. But like I said, I think the gaming industry is always at the forefront of innovation, and I'm really excited to see how companies will rise up to this new challenge of hyper, really tailoring acquisition strategies to the specific user that they're targeting at that exact time.
While we're on the topic of what comes next, I mean, you are here, you are deep into the data, no doubt. It never stops, it never rests. Maybe just a little personal note from yourself or even Moloco, what we might be able to expect from you in the next 12 to 18 months.
I don't know if I'm at liberty to to share what we're focusing on, but we are definitely still focused on gaming. We've opened up the market to more kind of IA and hybrid gaming. There are challenges around acquisition campaigns for those type of games. Which is what we're currently focused on, and I think there's also things to learn from the what we call consumer app segment and how that comes across in gaming. So if we're talking about cross device, there are a lot of other apps that have had this challenge before it came to gaming, and so how are they doing things, and what can we bring to the gaming market? I think is learnings that would benefit both ends.
See, now you have the idea for a really exciting piece of research. So much to learn, non-gaming and gaming apps. I always think, put them at a table and let them go at it, because of course non-gaming nailed, in a sense, engagement and re-engagement and remarketing, right? They had to.
But it's for a less, I think it's non-gaming is so vast, but at the same time gaming is so, it's all about passion, it's all about creativity, and so I think both areas have to learn from each other to get better.
Couldn't agree more. It's like games have been forced to change and evolve and adapt so very, very quickly that it can be really difficult to break out of that. But I spend quite a lot of time going to non-games events and talking to non-games people from tech and creative industries. And you're absolutely right, there's so much we can learn, but equally there's so much that we can offer to the rest of the world. But we just need to get out of our own little community, shall we say.
Broaden the community.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We started with you, Safia. We bring in your research. You didn't answer, but I know there's probably something coming that we will have you back.
I hope so. I enjoyed being here.
I'd love to have you back. Bring some data, and we will geek out together.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be in touch.
We have to make it happen. Well, Safia, it has been an absolute delight. It's been a joy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before you go, we have a couple of questions that we ask all of our guests that brings it right back into the heart of games. The first is, what are you playing right now? What's on your phone or your laptop or your console? We're not prejudiced that way. And secondly, what's your favourite game of all time ever?
All time is a big word. So currently, there's one game. I don't know how popular it is, but it's one game that it's kind of like my vacation during the day is I love Stardew Valley. I just think it's like a vacation. You just go in, do your little thing, you break off from reality, and then suddenly things are much more relaxed when you come back. Um,
Exactly. A beautiful place to be.
yeah, exactly. And I love the game. And it's one of these games that I never uninstall. I just keep it there. And I think in terms of favorite game, I have a lot of fun memories. I'm not currently uh, playing that much. I'm a mom of a toddler, and so I don't have a lot of time. But I think I have a lot of fun memories from kind of Switch when we were playing what's Overcooked. This was one of the games that we played a lot with my colleagues before I had a toddler at home asking me what I was doing every 3 seconds. But yeah, I love Overcooked. I love how you just go deep with your friends on it.
Couch co-op. You cannot go wrong with a good couch
I
co-op.
love a couch
And
co-op.
yeah, and a cooking couch co-op. A cute cooking couch co-op. Yeah, sorry, I'm now just alliterating for the sake of it. Safia, it's been really valuable, really interesting, and an absolute delight to have you. So, thank you. And as Peggy said, we will absolutely have to invite you back, and maybe we can see how those predictions panned out over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if I was right or I was wrong. Maybe wrong. I hope wrong.
No, it's going to be either way. It's going to be enlightening. And yes, I'll join Brian. Thanks so much, Safia. It was wonderful to have you on the show.
Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Brian. Happy to be here.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future.